STENT Company is a consumer electronics company which has faced a challenging year due to increased competition. STENT Company has a year ended of 30th of September 19 and an unaudited draft financial statements report and operating loss. In addition to this, the debt covenant limits based on gearing are close to being breached and the company is approaching its overdraft limit. Discuss appropriate accounting treatment which 10 companies should adopt for all issues identified above and their impact upon the gearing. Cash advance from Butster Company. On 27th of September 2019, Stent Company's finance director asked the accountant to record cash advance of 3 million received from customer of Butster Company. No, customer Butster Company. As a reduction in trade receivables, Butster is solely owned by Stent Company's finance director. The accountant has seen an agreement signed by both companies stating that 3 million will be repaid to Butster Company in 4 months' time. The finance director argued that the proposed accounting treatment is acceptable because the payment has been made in advance in case Butster Company wishes to order goods in the next 4 months. However, the accountant has seen no evidence of an intent from Butster Company to place orders with Stent Company. In the current scenario, we can see that this can be that the Butster Company is solely owned by Stent Company's finance director. Thus, in this case, it can be said to have a related party transaction. Or a related party transaction is a transaction wherein transfer of services, assets, and transfer of liabilities takes place, irrespective of the consideration paid, regardless of the consideration being paid. So, in this case, uh, the accountant has an agreement signed with both the companies. So in this case, when advance of 3 million was received from the customer, the finance director recorded this 3 million as cash being received, and however, no outflow of goods has taken place. Therefore, the एक मिनट अभी इसका appropriate gearing upon gearing में क्या impact आएगा? This 3 million would have otherwise been treated as a debt finance given by Butster Company to Stent Company. However, as Butster Company was solely owned by the Stent Company's finance director, the finance director argued that Butster Company would purchase goods in the future in the next 4 months' time. However, as no transaction has actually been taken place. Therefore, a disclosure of the related party transaction should be given. Otherwise, if this related party transaction is not given, then 3 million would be shown as cash inflow, which would otherwise have been shown as loan from Butster Company being given to Stent Company, because of which the gearing would have increased and the investors would have seen the company as more riskier. क्योंकि डेट फाइनेंस बढ़ गया ना ऐसे चेक कर लेते हैं ये रहा cash advance. The IAS 24 related party disclosures requires an entity's financial statements to contain disclosures necessary to draw attention to possibility that the financial statements may have been affected by the existence of related parties and by transactions and outstanding balances with such parties. अपन ने खाली IAS नहीं बोला, अपन कहेंगे IAS भी बोल देंगे. The finance director of Stent Company is a related party of Stent Company. The finance director controls Butster and therefore Stent and Butster are related parties of one another. As such, Stent Company must disclose the nature of the related party relationship with Butster Company as well as the information about all transactions, outstanding balances between Stent and Butster Company. According to the conceptual framework, the advance from Butster Company is a liability. Stent Company has a present obligation legally enforceable as consequence of binding contract the settlement of which involves stent company giving up resources, embodying economic benefits in order to satisfy the claim. Basically, stent company को goods transfer करने चाहिए थे बस्टर कंपनी को, except when it reflects the substance of transaction or event, offsetting detracts from the ability of users to understand the entity's transactions and to assess entity's future cash flows. IS1 presentation of financial statement states that entities shall not offset assets and liabilities unless required or permitted by IFRS standard. Offsetting a financial asset and a financial liability is permitted according to IAS 32 financial instruments presentation when the only when and only when an entity has legally enforceable right to set off the recognized amount and intends either to settle on net basis or on real or to realize the asset and settle the liability simultaneously. No such agreement is evident in this case. So, stent company should report the receivables and advance separately. तो रिसीवेबल्स और एडवांस को सेपरेटली शो करना चाहिए, सबका यही मीनिंग है कि उसको अलग से मतलब बताना चाहिए. इफ द एरर वाज नॉट करेक्टेड, स्टेम कंपनी वाज शोइंग अ लोअर करंट एसेट फिगर एंड कंसीलिंग द लायबिलिटी. मतलब क्योंकि ये लोन बन जाता है ना, लोन फ्रॉम, ये लोन गिवन बाय बस्टर कंपनी टू स्टेंट कंपनी, ऐसा तो ये लोग लोन को कंसील कर रहे थे, लायबिलिटी को कंसील कर रहे थे और एसेट को ज्यादा दिखा रहे थे. If disclosed as a current liability, it might be included in the debt element of gearing calculation, thus increasing the gearing. तो इन्वेस्टर का पर्सपेक्टिव हुआ था कि कंपनी रिस्की है. आगे नेक्स्ट क्वेश्चन, preference shares. On 1st of October 18, CEO and finance director each paid 2 million cash in exchange for preference shares from Stent Company. CEO and the finance director each paid 2 million in cash in exchange for preference shares in Stent Company, which provide cumulative dividends of 7% per annum. These preference shares can either be converted into fixed number of ordinary shares in 2 years' time or redeemed at par on the same date. At the choice of the holder, the finance director suggests to the accountant that the preference share should be classified as equity because the conversion is into fixed number of ordinary shares on a fixed date, fixed for fixed. The conversion is certain. The finance director's argument or suggestion that the accountant should classify these preference shares as equity shares is completely invalid because preference shares are a compound instrument. A compound instrument is an instrument that carries the characteristics of both a liability and an equity. तो बेसिकली उस पे वो जो प्रेफरेंस शेयर है उसके अंदर लायबिलिटी और इक्विटी दोनों के कंपोनेंट्स है. So in order to calculate the liability and the equity components, what we do is we bring the present value of the payments we estimate the future value of the payments and bring them to the present value, and then we find out the liability component. The liability component is a huge aspect or a huge uh, or is higher in amount than compared to equity shares, is higher in proportion as compared to equity component, and thus um, and thus we find out the equity component by reducing the total, by reducing the liability component from the total amount. तो ऐसा करके हम लोग ढूंढते हैं. इफ if the finance director showcases the preferences entirely as equity, then it won't be a fair presentation in accordance with IAS 32 financial instruments presentation, as IAS 32 requires a split to be made between liability and equity. Um, if the finance director shows the entire preferences as equity, then the gearing would reduce, and thus the entity would be showcasted as a less riskier investment. However, because of the split, the liability component will be higher than the equity component, and the entity would be a riskier investment. And thus in reality the gearing would increase. ठीक है. अभी यहाँ पर हमें कैलकुलेशन बताने होंगे तो अपन ऐसे बता देंगे कि देखो जो 2 मिलियन है वो कभी, एक मिनट भाई, तो कन्वर्जन कब होने वाला है? इन 2 years टाइम. So if the conversion is going to take place, then the amount of dividend payable will be brought back to the present value using the appropriate discount rate. तो ये सब कैलकुलेशन भी अपन थोड़ा बहुत मतलब बता सकते हैं इन लोगों को ऐसा। ये देखो कन्वर्टेबल रिडीमेबल प्रेफरेंशियल, अभी इनका आंसर पढ़ते हैं। IS 32, हाँ बाय द वे अपने को लायबिलिटी और इक्विटी कंपोनेंट क्या होता है वो भी बताना है। सो लायबिलिटी इज अ कंपोनेंट विच इन्वॉल्व्स फाइनेंशियल लायबिलिटी होता है ना ये, तो इफ लायबिलिटी कंपोनेंट इन्वॉल्व्स a contractual agreement in order to which a contractual agreement which involves an obligation to pay cash or cash equivalents in the future, and equity components is the component which has the residual interest in the net assets of the entity। ठीक है, ये देखो IS 32 defines an equity instrument as a contract which evidences residual interest in the assets of the entity after deducting the liabilities, मतलब ही net assets। An equity instrument has no contractual obligation to deliver cash or another financial asset or to exchange financial assets or financial liabilities under potential unfavorable conditions if settled by the issuer's own equity instruments, and equity instruments has no contractual obligation to deliver a variable number of shares. A critical feature in differentiating a financial liability from an equity instrument is the existence of contractual obligation of the insurer to either to deliver cash or another financial asset to the holder, ये भी अपन ने बोला, or to exchange financial asset or liabilities with the holder under conditions which are potentially unfavorable to the issuer. The preference shares offer the holder the choice of conversion into ordinary shares as well as redemption in 2 years' time. STENT should separately recognize a financial liability, the contractual agreement to deliver cash or another financial asset, and an equity instrument, a call option। तो ये भी अपने को दोनों split बताना होता है in accordance with IS 32। Stent company would measure the fair value of the consideration in respect of liability component based on the fair value of similar liability without an associated equity conversion option. The equity component is assigned the residual interest. Correction of the error would increase the non-current debt. Correction of the error would increase the non-current debt and decrease the equity. दिस विल इंक्रीज द गियरिंग, मतलब जब अपन इस चीज को करेक्ट करेंगे तो लायबिलिटी कंपोनेंट बढ़ जाएगा, इक्विटी कंपोनेंट कम हो जाएगा, जिसके कारण गियरिंग और इंक्रीज हो जाएगा और कंपनी और रिस्की दिखेगी। आगे बढ़ते हैं। Deferred tax asset. Stent company includes a deferred tax asset in the statement of financial position based on the losses incurred in the current and previous 2 years. The finance director has asked the accountant to include the deferred tax asset in full. He has suggested this on the basis that Stent company will turn into profitability once its funding issues are resolved. According to IS 12 income taxes, a deferred tax asset can be recognized on the basis of the unused losses of the current and the previous years if and only if there is if and only if an accurate estimate of the amount of profits to be incurred or to the profits that the company will gain in the future can be assessed or can be derived. uh, in the current scenario In the current scenario, the finance director has asked the accountant to include the deferred tax asset in full. This does not disclose or does not clarify whether the company is going to earn profits or not in the future, and if yes, then about then at which amount or what will be the amount of profitability that the company can earn. The presence of unused losses is a clear evidence or is a huge evidence that the company would find it difficult to enter into the profit stage sooner. Um, Also, the losses that the company has incurred in the current and the previous 2 years should be non-recurring losses. That is, such losses which cannot be incurred in the future, or onerous losses. The presence of previous 2 years losses itself is a strong evidence that company won't be able to generate profit in the near future as well, or find it difficult to generate profit in the near future. Thus, a deferred tax asset should not be recognized. चेक कर लेते हैं. In accordance with IAS 12, a deferred tax asset shall be recognized for carry forward unused losses to the extent that it is probable that future taxable profit will be available against the unused tax losses can be utilized. However, the existence of unused tax losses is a strong evidence that future taxable profit may not be available. Therefore, when an entity has a history of recent losses, the entity recognizes that a deferred tax asset arising from unused tax losses only to the extent that it has convincing evidence that sufficient taxable profit will be available against which the unused tax losses can be utilized. In such circumstances, the amount of deferred tax asset and the nature of the evidence supporting its recognition must be disclosed. The direction, एक मिनट the directors है पहली बात तो वो, लेकिन एक मिनट. तो जो नेचर ऑफ एविडेंस है कि हमारे पास हम किस एविडेंस पे बोल रहे हैं कि हमें प्रॉफिट होने वाला है, वो अपने को यहाँ पे डिस्क्लोज करना है. वो मुझे बस पॉइंट पढ़ना था. The directors of STENT should consider whether it is probable that STENT company will have taxable profits before the unused tax losses or unused tax credits expire, whether the unused tax losses result from identifiable causes which are likely to recur, and whether tax planning opportunities are available to the entity which will create taxable profits in the period in which the unused tax losses or unused tax credits can be utilized. To the extent that it is not probable that taxable profit will be available against unused tax. Actually, I think इतना काफी है जितना अपन ने बोला है, because it is only for 3 marks. इतना ज्यादा मतलब शायद बताने की जरूरत नहीं है. The removal of deferred tax asset would reduce the net assets. Therefore, equity gearing would increase. अगर हाँ, ये पॉइंट डालना जरूरी है कि अगर अपन ने डेफर्ड टैक्स एसेट को निकाल दिया है, उसको रिकॉग्नाइज नहीं किया, तो जो है वो देयरफॉर इक्विटी, तो फिर मतलब इक्विटी कम हो जाएगी, जिसके कारणवश गियरिंग वुड इंक्रीज. अभी लास्ट क्वेश्चन है 9 मार्क्स के लिए एथिक्स का. Discuss the ethical issues arising from the scenario, including any actions which accountant should take to resolve the issues. The accountant has been in her position for only a few months, and the finance director has recently commented that all these accounting treatments must be exactly as I have suggested to ensure growth of the business and the security of all our jobs. Both the finance director and the accountant are fully qualified members of ACCA. तो अपन चालू ऐसा करेंगे कि as both the finance director and accountant are fully qualified members of ACCA, both of them are required to comply with the ACCA Code of Ethics and Conduct principles, which involves the following basic principles, which are integrity, objectivity, professional competence and due care, for confidentiality and professional behavior. In the current scenario, let's first come to the statement के बारे बाद में आते हैं, क्योंकि पहले उन्होंने accounting treatments पूछे है ना. From all the above scenarios, we can see that in order to build reputation in front of the investors or the potential investors, the company wanted to decrease their gearing so that they were portrayed as a less riskier investment, So when it came to cash advance from Buster company, the finance director asked the accountant to record the cash advance of 3 million received from the customer. देखो ये लाइन पूरी मैंने कॉपी पेस्ट की, कस्टमर बस्टर कंपनी, as a reduction in trade receivables, because of which the gearing would have reduced, as the cash in advance was recorded as an asset rather than it being recorded as a loan from Buster company. Though Buster company does not expect a payback of the loan, because Buster is a solely owned of STENT company's finance director, because it is a related party. Still, it was considered to, but still, it was a related party loan and should have been disclosed by the finance director. Because finance director did not disclose this fact of the related party transaction. Should have been raised, or questions are raised regarding whether the finance director is trying to hide the fact that it has taken a loan from बस्टर कंपनी और कैश एडवांस फ्रॉम बस्टर कंपनी. फिर प्रेफरेंस शेयर्स के टाइम पे सेम एक दो पॉइंट्स रिपीट करेंगे कि फाइनेंस डायरेक्टर वांटेड टू रिकॉर्ड एवरीथिंग एज इक्विटी rather than conducting a split between liability and equity component. As being a finance director, he should have known the IFRS standards governing this principle, that IAS 32 requires a split between liability and equity component. तो ये बता देंगे. द अकाउंटेंट शुड हैव करेक्टेड दिस मिस्टेक, मतलब ये सारे जो मिस्टेक्स है वो अकाउंटेंट को करेक्ट करनी चाहिए. तो ये डेफर्ड टैक्स के टाइम में सेम सेम बता देंगे कि मैनेजर शुड नॉट हैव रिकॉर्डेड और डेफर्ड टैक्स एसेट फॉर द ऑन द बेसिस ऑफ अनयूज्ड टैक्स लॉसेस, ये भी बता देंगे. आफ्टर दैट पॉइंट बताने के बाद द अकाउंटेंट should rectify all the mistakes and discuss the repercussions of these mistakes with the finance director in order to correct it. However, the finance director has recently commented that, however, analyzing the finance director's recent comment, we can see that the financial director is trying to intimidate the accountant. The finance director is trying to intimidate the accountant by clearly threatening uh, about the security of the accountant's job. The finance director, the accountant should not be intimidated and should still rectify the mistakes or discuss the issues with the finance director. Uh, it is the responsibility of the finance director or the directors in general to report to the investors in the true manner and give them a fair representation of the financial statements as they are uh, as they are. तो उसके बाद वही अपना स्टैंडर्ड जिस तरीके से अपन एंड करते हैं, वो स्टैंडर्ड आंसर की द अकाउंटेंट should uh, should resolve the issue with the finance director. If the finance director is not responsive, then he should discuss these issues with other directors. Um, if the issues are still not resolved, then the accountant can seek help from the ACC helpline itself. At the last, if the finance accountant नहीं, if the accountant believes that the issues can never be resolved, then the last option should be resignation from the company itself. ये अपन बता देंगे. और कोई पॉइंट्स है क्या जो अपन यहाँ से उठा के डाल सकते हैं? तो ये अपन ने एंड किया. अभी इसके बीच बीच में अपने को जो पॉइंट्स डालने हैं वो अपन देख सकते हैं यहाँ पे. स्टेंट कंपनी है कंज्यूमर. एक्चुअली स्टेंट कंपनी ने अभी रिसेंटली लॉस भी किया था ना, बेस्ड ऑन द लॉसेस इनकर्ड इन द करंट एंड प्रीवियस टू. हाँ, तो अपन ये भी बोल सकते हैं कि एज द कंपनी हैज इनकर्ड लॉसेस इन द करंट year and in the previous 2 years, they will be very very desperate to raise finance in order to uh, conduct their operations or business operations, um, and thus would like to portray their image as a less riskier company in front of the potential investors. ये भी बोल सकते हैं. Then if the company is working in a competitive environment, then reporting a profit or getting finance would be one of the very important challenges which they face, and thus would be desperate to portray a better image or portray a less riskier gearing. ये बोल देंगे. एक्चुअली वही पॉइंट्स को अपने को कहीं ना कहीं रिपीट कर रहा हूँ मैं अभी, बट ठीक है, चेक करते हैं. Ethical aspects. ACCA rulebook contains bylaws, regulations, and code of ethics and conduct, which every ACCA member should follow. The accountant may feel pressured by the finance director's comments on job security, given the accountant has only been heard for in the position for few months. ये भी बोल सकते हैं कि she is in her position for few months, so she would like to fix her position. ऐसा. The accountant should comply with the fundamental ethical principles set out in the ACCA rulebook to act with integrity, objectivity, professional competence, due care, confidentiality, and professional behavior. ये अपन ने बोला था. The accountant should be mindful of the threats to these fundamental ethical principles. In doing so, the accountant should consider the relevant facts and ethical issues involved, the fundamental principles which are threatened, whether internal procedures exist which mitigate the threats, and what alternative courses of actions could be taken. In this case, all fundamental ethical principles with the execution of confidentiality appear under threat. Confidentiality कहाँ है? The financial director appears to be allowing bias and undue influence. हाँ, bias and undue influence है, लेकिन confidentiality का कहीं पर भी effect नहीं कर रहा है, I think. With the exception of confidence, okay, sorry. With the exception of confidentiality, हर एक चीज पे सवाल उठ रहे हैं, लाइक उसके प्रोफेशनल बिहेवियर पे. लाइक एक्चुअली अपन ना पहले 5 पॉइंट्स को लिंक करने का ट्राई करते हैं कि फाइनेंस डायरेक्टर प्रोफेशनली बिहेव नहीं कर रहा है. अगर उसको IAS 32 के बारे में पता ही नहीं है तो मतलब उसके पास वो प्रोफेशनल कॉम्पिटेंस नहीं है. इंटेग्रिटी और ऑब्जेक्टिविटी तो अपन ने बोला था कि ही इज नॉट यू नो providing the financial statements in its true and fair presentation and such, and thus questions can be raised about the integrity and objectivity. तो ये अपन ने बोला था. Appear to allowing bias and undue influence from the pressures imposed by the debt covenants, gearing and overdraft limits into the choice of accounting treatment rather than following accounting standards. The company is in the precarious position reporting losses in the current year. ये भी अपन ने consider किया था point. The financial director should act professionally in accordance with the applicable technical and professional standards, comply with the relevant laws and regulations, and avoid any actions which discredits the profession. The accountant faces an intimidation threat to objectivity given the comments from the finance director, who presumably has an influence over the career prospects. Assuming the accountant wishes to keep her job, the intimidation threat also gives rise to self-interest threat to objectivity. Before acting, the accountant should speak with the finance director, try to confirm the facts, discuss the treatment with the finance director, and explain the risks of non-compliance. The a record of conversation. अरे यार ये point मैं हमेशा भूल जाता हूँ. A record of conversations and actions should be kept. A record of conversations and actions should be kept. मैं इसको ना highlight कर देता हूँ. Stent company may also have internal procedures which mitigate the threats. It may be that finance director is not technically up to date, in which case a safeguard would be to undergo continuing professional development. If the finance director refuses to comply with the accounting standards, then it would be appropriate to discuss the matters with the other directors or audit committee to seek solution. Then seek professional advice from ACCA या फिर ACCA हेल्पलाइन भी बोल सकते हैं. And consider legal advice if necessary. A final consideration for the accountant if matters cannot be satisfactorily resolved would be resignation. इन्होंने काफी छोटा आंसर लिखा है 9 मार्क्स के लिए, थोड़ा और बड़ा लिखना है. In which we can address these 3 issues, क्योंकि अपने को ये जो 3 issues अपन एड्रेस करेंगे इन दिस लास्ट आंसर ऑफ 9 मार्क्स, उससे आंसर बड़ा भी बन जाएगा. और अपन ने ऊपर के ही पॉइंट्स नीचे कॉपी पेस्ट किए, सो Control C Control V ही किया है एक्चुअली अपन ने. ठीक है. थैंक यू. बाय.